Today, let's dig into the laugh of disbelief. And I want to do it by looking at the story of a man named Abram and his wife, Sarai. Let me read the start of their story. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, your father's family, go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you'll be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on the earth will be blessed through you." So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot, which was his brother, went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. Now, if you're new to the unfolding story of the Bible, this that we just read is a pivotal section to take note of. The calling of Abram and the promise of a son and descendants is actually the beginning of the Jewish people. We just read the start of the entire Jewish race. As a called out group who would be used by God as a bridgehead onto the scene to call the world back to God. From Abram would come Isaac, and then Jacob, and then the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the exodus of the people of Israel from Egypt under Moses, and then entering the promised land, and all leading to the coming of the Messiah from the Jewish people who would be the key to the saving of the world. And that, of course, was Jesus. And starting with an ocean and tracing an ocean to a major, massive rivers, to a stream, to a creek, to a small spring, you can trace God's redemptive plan after we screwed it up so bad in the Garden of Eden back to this moment, from Jesus all the way back to Abram, the moment when God called Abram to start a people, a nation from whom a person would come, the God-man, God himself in human form, Jesus, to call the world back to God. But notice something important here. God waited to call Abram to this task of starting a nation when he was, wait for it, 75 years old. And not because he and Sarai hadn't tried to have children. He was childless. They tried. So we're already seeing him calling a 75-year-old man, childless man, to start a nation. You can almost already see the twinkle in God's eye on this one. But to Abram's credit, he goes all in. Now, like most of us, when it comes to God and prayer and asking him things and needing things, we have only one timetable now. We have little place for waiting. We don't have room for weeks. We don't have room for months. Well, time went by for Abram and Sarai. A lot of time. We're not talking weeks. We're not talking months. We're talking years. And as strong as he had started out, he started to lose faith. And that's when God showed up and spoke to him again, this time in a vision. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great." Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir. For you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. So, Abram keeps waiting. Now, the Bible keeps things pretty real, and this story is no exception. Some time went on after that vision, and Abram began to kind of just wonder whether this was all real or whether God was going to do this, or maybe there was a plan B that needed to be followed. And so he kind of ran out of that patience. Sarai certainly ran out of patience. By now, Abram was no longer 75. He was 85. So they came up with their own plan B. Here's what it was. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. But she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. Now, Little background here. In the ancient Near Eastern culture of that day, there was little knowledge of what we would call gynecology. When it came to children, what was believed was that the man was everything. There was no understanding that conception was the result of a male sperm and a female egg. Instead, the man just deposited his seed, and the woman was simply the incubator of that. What mattered was the man's semen. There was also no knowledge of modern-day genetics, so there was no sense that a different woman other than your wife would have any bearing whatsoever on the child. So if a wife couldn't bear children, it wasn't unheard of at all for the husband to bear children through a servant or a concubine of some kind. It wasn't plan A, but it wasn't necessarily a scandal either. In fact, in that day, it was often the wife's responsibility to make sure that there was a surrogate childbearer if needed. But for Abram and Sarai, as we already know, this was bigger than that. God had told them he was going to give them a child through Sarai. He told them that his call in their life was to create an entire nation through them. And here, Sarai said it was God who made her barren. Something had happened to whatever God had promised. So she was now having to take things into her own hands and make sure that Abram had a child. And Abram went along with it. And most of the men listening to me would think, well, I'll bet he did. And it worked. Hagar got pregnant and gave birth to a son that was named Ishmael when Abram was 86 years old. Okay, now fast forward for the next scene. 13 years later, God shows up again to remind Abram of his promise. Let me read it. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Serve me faithfully and live a blameless life. I will make a covenant with you by which I will guarantee to give you countless descendants. At this, Abram fell face down on the ground, and then God said to him, this is my covenant with you. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. What's more, I am changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Instead, you will be called Abraham. And by the way, Abram is the father of one, and Abraham is a word for the father of many. For you will be the father of many nations. I will make you extremely fruitful. Your descendants will become many nations. So Abram, now Abraham, which means, as I said, the father of many, is now 99 years old. This is the third time God has come to him, starting back when he was a young nipper of 75, to say, we're in a covenant together. I made you a promise. This is happening. Now, Abraham probably by now isn't too worried about the baby side of it. Hagar took care of that. Ishmael by now is around 13. He's just wondering how the rest of it is going to unfold because one son isn't exactly the start of countless descendants. But God wasn't finished. At 99, the time had come finally for the big reveal. And here it is. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Now, here we see that Sarai gets a name change too. She went from Sarai, spelled with an I, to Sarah, spelled with an H. You know, we've dug into this in terms of Hebrew etymology, and it's really unclear what the old spelling indicated, but the new spelling we do know meant princess, indicating she was going to share in Abraham's calling and that kings would descend from her. And, this is important, it made it clear that the entire covenant would be jointly fulfilled through her. She was going to have a son. At 90 years of age, long past her childbearing years and physical ability to get pregnant, she would get pregnant, have a child, and that child would be the fulfillment of this calling that God had put before Abraham 25 years before. Now, look at what made the look at what that made the pre-Viagra Abraham do in light of his post-menopausal wife. Then Abraham bowed down to the ground, but he laughed to himself in disbelief. How could I become a father at the age of 100, he thought. And how can Sarah have a baby when she is 90 years old? So Abraham said to God, may Ishmael, live under your special blessing. But God replied, no, Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son for you. You will name him Isaac. and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant. My covenant will be confirmed with Isaac, who will be born to you and Sarah about this time next year." When God had finished speaking, he left Abraham. Now, let me sharpen that up a little bit because I think it's important. Abraham didn't laugh at God, mocking him. He laughed with God, about what God was saying. He was laughing at the very idea of it all, the absurdity, the incredible craziness of it all. Have you ever done that? If you haven't, if you keep walking with God, you will, particularly if you listen to him. God seems to set us up for it, like I said earlier, with a twinkle in his eye. When Moses went up to part the ocean, don't you think he just had to be kind of laughing about it inside? When he held it up, saying, okay, I'm actually holding up this rod for the ocean to part, because God told me to. And or when David, picked up that rock for a slingshot to take on Goliath, how he must have had just a smile on his face at the craziness of what God was going to do through a shepherd boy to the greatest warrior on the planet. Can't you just hear the laugh of a young girl named Mary, who was told she was going to have a baby, even though she knew she was a virgin? And was God upset at the laugh? No. He'd been waiting for it. In fact, you want to know something? Remember how God told Abraham to name the son from Sarah Isaac? Do you know what the name Isaac means? Isaac means he laughs. Well, the fun wasn't over. We haven't gotten to where Sarah hears about all this. Let me read that. Sarah was listening at the tent opening. Abraham and Sarah were old by this time, very old. Sarah was far past the age for having babies. Sarah laughed within herself. An old woman like me get pregnant with this old man of a husband? God said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, me, have a baby, an old woman like me? Is anything too hard for God? I'll be back about this time next year. Sarah will have a baby. Sarah lied. She said, I didn't laugh because she was afraid. And God said, yes, you did. You laughed. It cracks me up every time I read it. I mean, Sarah's eavesdropping on this whole thing and laughs just like Abraham did, but she gets caught a little bit, and she gets this little gentle kind of admonition from God about how he most certainly can pull off anything and everything he wants, and reminds her that, yes, about a year from now, there will be a son. But what I find funny is when she says, oh, I didn't laugh, and God says, oh, yes, you did. Oh, no, I didn't. Yeah, you did. It's back and forth. And it's like, again, God's just kind of having fun with it. Well, there's one last laugh in this story, and I think it's a kind of a sweet one. Let me read it. Now, the Lord is gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him, and Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, and this is her looking back on it, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. I love that whole story. Abraham and Sarah learned how to laugh with God, first at the outrageous promises and claims and activities and leadings, a laugh of a mouth wide open with disbelief, or at least wide open at the faith it would take to follow it. Because these laughs really are about a 100% faith ride. And I think it's a wonderful laugh. It's a healthy laugh. It's a faith-building laugh, because it's not the laugh of mockery, but it's a laugh at the crazy adventure of it all. The laugh of a roller coaster ride, the laugh of whitewater rapids, the laugh of a bungee jump. The laugh that comes when you do something you can hardly believe anyone in their right mind would do, but God in his right mind is calling you to do it, to believe it, to live in light of it. And you never felt more alive. Those are life-changing laughs. Have you laughed like that in recent years? You say, well, God hasn't exactly paid me any visits, laying any big faith steps on me, or things to believe, or things to act on. Hasn't he? If you were to think about it. Isn't there one thing you've read in the Bible, or heard maybe during one of our times together, or felt impressed on your spirit by God to do that was faith challenging? Maybe to give an irrationally generous gift, maybe to serve selflessly where it really was a sacrificial cost for you to do so, to reach out courageously and take a relational risk and share what Jesus could mean to a friend, to wait expectantly on something that you truly do believe that God has told you he's going to do, to step out risk-takingly. Can't you take the bait, laugh the laugh God is laughing as well, and join the faith adventure he's calling all of us to live? There's an important lesson here that I would hate for us to miss, and that is that this kind of laughter really is part of our relationship with God. It's part of the play in life, God playing with us going along for the ride, but it's a faith-building enterprise. G.K. Chesterton once wrote that God may be the only true child left in the universe, while all the rest of us have lost our capacity for real joy and wonder. He even goes so far as to suggest that much of God's creative activity was actually play. Let me see if I can give you the gist of his thinking on this. One of the games I used to play with my kids when they were young was called Tickle Slide. And I had built this little swing set in our backyard, and they would climb to the top of the slide part of it, and I would straddle the slide at the bottom and waiting for them to come down. And as they came down the slide, I would tickle them the whole way down. And then they'd get down at the bottom and say, do it again. And do it again. So they'd climb back up, do it, and I'd do it again, tickle them over and over again. If I did it 20 times, they'd say, do it again that 21st time. So how did God create daisies? Did he just say, daisies be? Or Chesterton says we might want to think about it a little bit differently. That after he created the first little daisy, something childlike inside the very heart of God yelled, do it again. So God created daisy number 2. And then something inside of God said, do it again. And daisy number 3 was created, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then 50 billion trillion daisies later, the great God of the universe is still jumping up and down, clapping his hands and having a blast. Listen to how Chesterton describes it. He says, it is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy. For we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. So learn to laugh with God, even in disbelief, but anchor that disbelief with faith that calls you to trust and action. You'll shake your head on the front end but you'll also laugh at the end as well when you see just how faithful God is.